What do you think you want to talk about when it comes to content marketing?
There's one thing that's most missing from content right now. It's clarity. Marketers, they have all the information. I'm not convinced they don't understand their customers that much. I just don't think they know how to talk to them in a way that really just leaves them with no doubt of exactly why they should be reading that content or why that content is relevant to them.
Hey, Patrick, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, dude. Good to be here.
So what would you say is your content marketing claim to fame?
Content marketing claim to fame. Wow, that's a big one. So I would say as KlientBoost as an agency, I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily a claim to fame. I think probably we've maybe influenced the most amount of other marketers of any other agency. And I say that as before I joined KlientBoost, this is somebody that came from like small town in the UK, moved to a big city and, came into my marketing career a little bit later in life. When I saw a job for KlientBoost come up, I'd already heard of them because when you're trying to learn digital marketing skills, pretty much anything like from, best Facebook ad examples to, best CTAs for conversion rate optimization, how to win at Google Ads, all those common, I guess what we'd call, I'll get onto this later, but like classic, top of funnel keywords. KlientBoost dominated them from like 2000, from the year like 2020, like right up until 2023. And so, when I even joined KlientBoost 2 years ago, I'd already built a little bit of a following on LinkedIn and people were reaching out to me like, dude, congrats on getting to KlientBoost. I learned so much from KlientBoost content. So if there was one thing I would say content specifically, I would challenge any other agency to be able to say they've influenced quite as many marketers as we have.
That's a really good one. And I'll throw this in for our listening audience. If you are not familiar with KlientBoost, I was trying to understand a little bit more because that wasn't my story in terms of KlientBoost, but that's because I don't have a relationship with KlientBoost. I have a relationship with you via LinkedIn and your content, and that's how I know you. That's why you're on the podcast. But I did see that you guys have this fantastic line. It's on your website. You have more case studies than most agencies have clients. I thought I was like, that's a pretty big deal. So that's why I wanted you on the show. You're going to teach us a few things. I'm excited to learn from you here. That's what this is all about. We learn together. I like to name these episodes "How to Fill in the Blank." What do you think you want to talk about when it comes to content marketing specifically today? How to what were you thinking?
Oh man, do you know what? Do you know where I want to take this? Which is maybe I'm kind of like maybe putting you on the spot because this might be a deviation from what I had in the notes. But if I think there's one thing that's most missing from content right now, it's clarity. And to be honest, I think we have some work to do on it too at KlientBoost. That's something that's really, really difficult to do when you're in the weeds of a product and you understand it inside out. It's really very, very difficult to detach yourself from how much you already know and kind of envision the content from somebody that's reading it anew. And so one of the most common mistakes I see, and I think this is like a superpower for me specifically, I think this is where I kind of shine with content, is being able to like really, really strip it back and be like, okay, if I was a blank slate and I didn't know anything about this company, didn't know anything about the problem they solve, would this content make sense to me? And I think that's probably the thing most content marketers could really do with putting more focus in. Because I think, it's become kind of cliche on LinkedIn at the moment for people say, you've got to do the fundamentals, you've got to be talking to customers, you've got to be running the split tests, you need to get onto winter and get some message testing done or whatever. It's like they're drowning in data. Like they have all the information. I'm not convinced they don't understand their customers that much. I just don't think they know how to talk to them in a way that really, really just leaves them with no doubt of exactly why they should be reading that content or why that content is relevant to them.
Are you saying there is a gap in terms of how marketers are talking to their customers for the purpose of getting that message that's on the outside of the bottle to be more accurate about them? Does that make sense?
Kind of, but I think more so even just from the perspective when it comes to content specifically, like I read a lot of content pieces where I'm like, I don't get it. I land on the website or I go to the blog and I'm like, I'm not sure what you're trying to communicate here. So it leaves me at the end where I'm like, there's still some gaps for me here. And I think that's a huge one. A classic example for me is, let's take thought leader ads. It's blowing up right now. Like everybody's all about thought leadership. And so as a director of marketing, I'm getting like tons of B2B companies trying to sell me software and they're all using thought leader ads because they read on LinkedIn that you meant to do thought leader ads. And I can name one that's showed up in my feed where I can really tell you why I'm meant to care about this content, or even what the name of the business is and what problem they could help me with. Like really very, very few, unless it's brands that I kind of already had some awareness of, in which case I'm going into it with, you know, a little bit of mental availability kind of already pre-built. That's kind of the thing. It's, you know, I'm reading these posts and I think it's the classic like checkbox marketing. Okay, we just got to get like, you know, a thought leader post out.
It sounds like a thoroughness issue. Like you haven't considered, you said the word gaps. Well, I think we both mentioned the word. I've seen that in my own content. In fact, I did a post recently about, it was meant to be a controversial take. I thought I'd get more excitement out of it. It was how podcast clips are not a video strategy. And I was like, this is really good. And I had a thorough post about it and a short little silly video talking about it. It was really about the text content and it got minimal engagement. I realized, oh, video strategy. I meant to say thought leadership strategy, and I used the wrong words. And you're talking about something as simple as that, where you're missing some key contexts like somebody hasn't given this a look over and been like, will Joe from purchasing at our, you know, will they see that? Is that what you're talking about then?
That's probably more the putting something in front of somebody that's like relatable and resonates. And that is part of clarity, right? Because I mean, you came into it with, here's what I think I'm talking about. And here's what the audience interprets me as talking about. And it's like, I can tell you as a director of marketing, and it's probably fair to say I'm probably like a good percentage of your ICP, but it's like, I could bet that there's maybe 5% of marketing directors out there that are sitting down and thinking about a video strategy. Like, I don't think it's not like a terminology we would use. And the interesting thing is that's actually more of a terminology that maybe a videographer kind of like yourself or you know, video content creator like yourself would use. And so the terminology I would use is thought leadership strategy, content strategy, marketing strategy. I think sometimes it's even, you know, this is a small tweak that people can make. This is a very fundamental marketing principle that I think just gets overlooked all the time, which is lead with the pain point. Like really lead with the pain point. What's the, I guess, cost of people, you know, not getting their video distribution strategy right? And so what we might say is, you know, lack of a differentiated message, lack of like congruence of the message, or the message isn't going to be impactful enough, then it's not going to build the relevant brand recall that needs to happen to actually generate pipeline from this video. And so with that, what you can then say is, okay, well, I still want to talk about the strategy, but I'm going to sell the person first on the thing that they want. Here's a common scenario that I see when I speak to B2B marketing directors. They've done the multi-purpose content that everybody told them to do, and they're posting video content snippets from podcasts every single day on LinkedIn. Yet for the past 6 months, pipeline's been flat. Here's why this happens. And then you've hooked somebody with the thing that's like, well, I can guarantee that probably, I don't know, I'm making numbers up right now, so please nobody like fact check me on this, but like probably 50% of marketers in my position have tried to repurpose other content and not seen a lift from it. And so you're gonna hook somebody's attention with that. It's super, super clear. And this is more what I kind of mean when it comes to clarity, is the way that I just explained that as if I'm having a conversation. And what a lot of marketers will do is try and make it really fancy and creative. And they'll be like, the pipeline issue. And it's like, nobody cares about the pipeline issue. Like, you think it kind of sounds fancy, but as a hook on LinkedIn, it almost never works unless you're like Seth Godin and you've been, you know, super famous for the last 15 years. And you've already built that right to pretty much say whatever you want. But for most companies, especially in, you know, for us, we service a lot of companies in the kind of like 10 million to like 100 million range. So they're not super, super famous. You haven't earned your stripes to be able to get away with doing that kind of, I guess, more kind of like esoteric.
Well, I love that this has turned into a free coaching session here from Patrick. You know, that's why I do this. I'm learning, and everyone gets to learn with me. And I love that nuance. I thought you were talking about clarity. No, this is what you're saying. It's about talking about how your audience sees it. And that's always, I can feel the rub even as you're talking, like, but, you know, I can just sense that, like, but it brings me back to, I've had a few of these conversations, had one with Erin Balsa, who's another LinkedIner like us, and she focuses on research reports. It's all about, you know, if you can talk to people, do your research, really is what you're talking about. Like, have conversations. What are they saying? How are they talking about it? And then connect it back. It sounds so simple. Like, I understand that. And I know it's important. I would say that. I would say that as a piece of advice. Well, are you talking to customers? But at what point Do you know, when you had to do this, when you've done this type, I'm sure you've done this type of activity for KlientBoost, put yourself in my shoes. Was there a point where you had to release some kind of idea to get better performance, release an idea about how you believe you should be communicating in order to get better performance?
I mean, that's a really good question. So, I mean, I get humbled all the time with content. So I would say I'm very fortunate. We're very much like quite an experimental agency. So we're really willing to just kind of, throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. Is there anything that I've had to release? Honestly, the thing that I just told you about, which is, for me, I came into marketing through an unusual route, which is I didn't go to business school. I studied English literature. And so I'd never planned to go in marketing. I just did something that I was good at, which was writing. And so for me, I actually really loved creating, cool taglines. And throughout my career, I started out in brand agencies, and brand agencies especially are obsessed with taglines. And taglines can be important when they're part of a really clear positioning strategy, but with the lack of a positioning strategy, they won't work. And it's funny, I can think of so many scenarios where I'm talking to creative directors and they're like, the tagline's the most important thing. But it was like every time I would run tests on paid media, nobody's responding to the tagline. And again, unless you're like a Nike. So I've run some ads. This was like before I decided to kind of go all in on B2B marketing. In like my B2C days, I would run ads for like big whiskey brands. And it's like, when you've already built up all that clout, I literally used to post a picture, just a beautiful scenic picture of an island in Scotland, if it was a Scotch brand, and you would generate like hundreds of thousands in revenue. But when you're a business that doesn't have that, you can't do that. You have to be really clear. And so when I would work with these small mom and pop B2Bs, they would come into us for, a brand, like a rebrand. We would create these amazing taglines and it would be really, really creative. But when I was in Facebook, it was like, just tell them what you do, the problem you solve, and why they should care. And that I can think of an example where it was like somewhere in the region of the tagline ad had about 2 conversions attached to it. And then we tested just this simple, clear ad that was just a carousel of products with a little more clarity in it. And it got like 90 leads, and they were qualified leads. These were leads from companies like Facebook and Microsoft. It was insane. And the reason we were able to do that is just purely focusing on clarity. And so the annoying thing is, again, as a natural writer and somebody who does love to be flowery with writing, I have to relearn that lesson all the time. And I think a lot of marketers do too. So that's also something I've had to relearn a couple of times since I've been in this role at KlientBoost, where it's, everyone gets excited in the brainstorming session because they're throwing creative ideas at the wall. But the truth is, nobody gives a shit. Like they just want to know that you can help them. And they want to know that they want to have confidence that whatever solution you're going to help them with is actually going to solve the problem.
And in many ways, being creative gets in the way of getting results.
Well, it's an interesting thing because you don't have to not be creative. You just have to find a new way to be creative. So what I would say is a good example of that is, so you saw one of the marketing metaphors videos that we've done, sent me a DM. And so that marketing metaphors video was very, very creative. So it's a super creative thing where we essentially like personify a common marketing metaphor that represents something marketers experience every single day. So in this instance, I think it was hand holding. So it's like this idea that lots of marketers feel like when they work with an agency, they're having to hold the agency's hand and like pull them along when they hired the agency because they wanted the agency to push them outside of their comfort zone. So we did this video where it's this classic, in-house marketer who's basically holding the hand of her agency the whole time, and the agency's just getting in her way. And that's creative, but it's also very, very clear. And then when we put the tagline at the end, it was something along the lines of like, ever feel like your marketing agency sees a toddler and you have to hold their hand? You're not going to have that with KlientBoost. And literally, we closed our biggest deal of the year because they saw that video and they said, this is the exact experience I'm having with my current agency and I want out. Like, that's not why I hired them. And so you can do both. But I think the way I would explain it actually is, you want to be creative, but you don't want to be an artist. Like, you're not trying to be Salvador Dali here. Like, you're trying to be, like, it needs to be very, very clear.
Yeah. You're starting with the data, and the data is, this is the conversation we had and this is the pain point they have. And I think back to the biggest ads, they're always touching on whether it's emotional in a good way or funny, there always is a pain point. They're just highlighting the pain point creatively. And that's what you're talking about. When you've gotten stuck like that, when you've gotten stuck thinking back your own story, or even thinking with your clients on getting in the way of clarity, what have you found to be helpful? For the marketers like us who are, is it just, it's as simple as do the basics, going back to the idea you said earlier, the fundamentals, like just talk to your people, start taking notes, and don't try to make things up on their behalf, which I think is what tends to happen sometimes. Like we're connecting the dots for them versus just taking the dots they're giving us and understanding it deeper.
The best place to start is to reframe the way that we say it. Everyone says like you need to be talking to your customers. That's not true. You need to be listening to your customers, and that's a huge difference. And the reason that's different is because, again, the reason, we come back to marketing metaphors. We'll probably do a video on this eventually, which is like checkbox marketing, which is some marketers will read influencers, like me or like you or, like Dave Gerhardt, for example, say, you got to be talking to customers regularly. And they'll be like, cool, spoke to 5 customers, check this month. But it's like, did you really listen to them? Did you listen to the problems that are really, really important to them? I'll give you an example. So I'm going to give a shout out to Pep Lahar and Winter here because we tested their tool for the first time this month. And that actually, so talking about clarity, we recently did a homepage, what we thought was even a data-driven homepage revamp, which was based on, when I first got into role, I did a ton of just scraping as many sales calls as possible to find out what is really, really important to people. And the funny thing about that is that's almost like too late in the journey to find out what's important to people. So really all they talk about on sales calls is goals. And so what's interesting is we made our homepage then very, very goal driven. So that's why there's so much about all the case studies. That's why there's so much about all the reviews that we have. That's why there's, a whole section just on how we approach goal pacing. And then so we run this test with Winter. The interesting thing is that the feedback that we get is that, yes, that's very, very important, but there's other things that are frustrating them that actually have much higher importance to them, which we don't talk about at all, which we actually have some really, really unique, if you class our service as a product, we have some really, really unique product features that we've built just to prevent these problems that you don't want to happen from happening. And so that's another example. I guess you've got to like test and retest and kind of like validate things. And it was interesting as well, because when we did that winter test, coming back to the clarity piece, it was somewhere in the region of like, I think the average rating was 3.5 out of 5 for clarity. And we're like, okay, well, that hurts to hear that. But that's also really good feedback to get because at least we have a baseline to improve upon now where we can say, okay, you've told us exactly why this isn't clear. And then we can go in and improve that. So how to improve that? I mean, it's tricky because there's a lot of people that talk about the mom test, which is like, if your mom can't understand it, then it's too complicated. That's wrong. Like I worked for a vertical farming startup that's selling $1 million vertical farms. That's some of the most complicated technology on the planet. It's like, that's never going to pass the mom test. And so what you really need to do is get it in front of somebody who is your ICP and be like, does this make sense to you? Because if this doesn't make sense to you, then it's wrong. And these days, again, with tools like Winter, it's super cost effective. Cost us like, I don't know, like $2,000 to get it in front of a decent bunch of our ICP. Like it's not a lot to get it in front of people. And we got some really good feedback that, okay, there's some issues with clarity here. Because I think, again, coming back to the point at the beginning of the podcast, when you get lost, not lost in, but when you're in the product every day and you live and breathe it, you already fully understand it. And so it's really, really easy to skip the important nuance that's really important. And, let me give you one final thing to sign off on here, which I think is useful. We put like a random aside on the new website. So we had some arrows that we would point to like, hey, here's a fun little interesting fact about our service. And we got like a load of feedback that one of these things that we put as an aside that's barely readable, to be honest, was like one of the most valuable differentiators and clear differentiators on the page. And I'm like, wow, so that's how to improve clarity. Like get it in front of people who are actually going to buy your product and ask them like, how clear is this? Does this make sense to you? Do you know what to do next? do you want to even take the next step?
That is fascinating. You're tickling something in the back of my head about having done this where you show, it reminds me of my web design days, actually. That's what it reminds me of. So I used to be a web designer, graphic designer. One of the components of that is do user testing. And that's what it's reminding me of. So that's fascinating, realizing there's a skill set I learned all those years ago, decades ago, that I could technically use now again. That's a really good idea. That one last question for you, Patrick. You can hire agencies like Winter and things like that. Have you found any kind of what's the word, guerrilla marketing tactic to do this? Is it as simple as just reach out to 100 people in your network and say, hey, I'm looking for some feedback on some messaging we're doing?
I don't know if this is really a guerrilla marketing tactic. It depends how much money you have. If you throw some gift cards out there, it's pretty easy to get a bunch of people on the call. Now, I guess the aside there is you are going to pre-select for a segment of the audience that's more receptive to gift cards. So, for example, you may not get as many of the more cynical people on the call because they'll already be like, I'm not interested in your gift card.
You're attracting a certain kind of personality that way is what you're saying.
But I mean, the main thing is if you get, you only need to really, cost $500 to speak to 5 people. It's not statistical significance, but if 5 people say the exact same thing about something that's wrong with the landing page, for me, that's like 80% confidence level to be like, something's up here. And especially if you're in a position where pipeline's not as high as you want it to be, you're not hitting goals or conversion rate's too low or something like that, there's the signal that you need to change something. So it's like, okay, well, 2 pieces of signal that you can put together to, at least carve a path forward. And then, hopefully you improve performance a bit, free up some more budget, and then you can do something more in depth.
I love that perspective. Patrick, thank you so much for being here. I've learned a lot. I'm really excited actually, because I've been getting some feedback in this exact area of confusion. Some people resonate, some people doesn't. I'm trying to figure out what is going on with that. This alone is just gold for me. Thank you for some free coaching here today. That's why I do this. Just kidding. Where can people learn more about you?
Yeah, good question. Lots of places. If you want to learn more about KlientBoost, we're a performance marketing agency. Head to KlientBoost.com. That's KlientBoost with a K as well. Although if you do Google it with a C, it will still come up, fortunately. If you want to just get more. I share a lot of content marketing, LinkedIn ads, Google ads, tips about demand generation in general on LinkedIn. So follow me at Patrick-James-Cumming on LinkedIn.
All right. Well, thank you again.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.